again, baseball romantics. Jason joining you for episode 8 of our first season of the RAB podcast. And as per usual, I have my best teammates, Bruce and Nico, joining me as we are going to briefly recap the week that was in MLB. But also, we want to start off with some thoughts on a huge announcement this week from the MLB Commissioner, Rob Manfred, as he has lifted the lifetime ban on players such as Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson, among the other Black Sox. So that was a huge announcement. I don't know that it surprised a lot of people. I think a lot of people expected perhaps that would happen after the passing of Pete Rose. So we are going to dive into that. The day it happened, I actually gave a lot of my thoughts on a Facebook Live, and I know several of you jumped on and saw that. So I'll keep my comments pretty brief and let Bruce and Nico really share their thoughts, and we'll dig into this. So, first of all, this does not guarantee that anybody that the ban was lifted on automatically goes into the Hall of Fame. So I think that's a big misconception among a lot of people. I noticed in the comments, a lot of people thought that this kind of just is an automatic now, that Pete Rose will get in. And we'll focus on Rose and probably Shoeless Joe, as those are the two most famous players this affects. But no, it does not do that. The understanding that I have of the situation is that both will have to be voted in by the Classic Era Committee, which does not meet again until December of 2027. So if that committee decides to vote one or both of those gentlemen in, they will not be inducted into the Hall of Fame until summer of 2028. And that's not guaranteed. There are people on that committee, I'm sure, that have mixed feelings about both of those gentlemen because of the transgressions they had that got them the lifetime ban to begin with. So just wanted to clear that up. As far as my own personal opinion here, I will say that I do believe Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe, for that matter, do belong in the Hall of Fame. But I'm a big proponent of making sure we tell the whole story. We should put on the plaque or somewhere in that Hall of Fame, we should tell the story about why these two received a lifetime ban. And then also with Pete Rose, we got to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. The underage relationship, I know, is on a lot of people's radar. That kind of thing, to me, is awful, obviously. I don't know that it should keep him out of the Baseball Hall of Fame as being the all-time hits leader. I can understand why people feel that way. There is a character clause in the Hall of Fame requirements. But I do think to tell the full story of Major League Baseball, if you're someone who's walking through the Hall of Fame 50 years from now and you want to know that kind of story from beginning to end of Major League Baseball, I don't think you can tell it without Shoeless Joe Jackson and Pete Rose and perhaps some of the other Black Sox. I know there's some borderline. Eddie Sykott perhaps is borderline Hall of Famer, but that's my opinion. I'll keep it short. Like I said, I do think they should be in, but I think we have to tell the whole, full, unadulterated story. So my esteemed colleagues here, I will turn it over to you guys, and let's get Nico's thoughts first. Nico, your thoughts on the situation with Rose and the Black Sox.
I'm not old enough to have watched Pete Rose play, but I'm obviously old enough to be part of the 30-plus year sort of boycott of Pete Rose. And, of course, I'm familiar with the stats, and the stats speak for themselves, right? He's the hits king, 42-56. He's got the most hits in baseball history. He played for a long time, obviously. He played for, I believe it was 20-plus years or close to that, right, guys? So my thing is it's an ironic time to have made that decision so many years later and after, obviously, passing away last fall. Pete's been gone now since last October. So it took 6 months. But my thoughts on the situation are similar to the PED situation. I think that it's a good thing for baseball for Pete to have his day, so to speak, regarding his opportunity to get voted in. Because like you said, Jason, it's not a done deal yet. But if we're going to look at baseball, the Hall of Fame specifically, and we're going to judge it based off of merit, production, albeit there is, like Jason mentioned, a character clause, Pete belongs in the Hall of Fame, based off of the stats. The stats speak for themselves. I understand what he did was a cardinal sin. He gambled on baseball. And, at the time, and obviously we live in a different time today with, legalized gambling. And they say that the players today and coaches cannot gamble on their team, but who the hell knows, right? I mean, who can you really police that to the way that they did many, many years ago, decades ago? So I think it's a good thing for baseball. It's ironic that they tied the Black Sox into the Pete situation because obviously those guys played over 100 years ago. So, and they've been deceased for, 70 years. I know Shoeless Joe Jackson died, I believe, 1951. And obviously what they did was really the ultimate, by throwing the game. So that was a severe thing that they did. And obviously they had a severe penalty for it. But I think it's a good thing for baseball to move on. We can finally take a breath and move on and see what the writers essentially vote on. If character matters, unfortunately, Pete might have more no's than yays. We'll see what happens. But I do believe that it's a step in the right direction. And for the Pete Rose family, I think they're relieved that their father can finally have an opportunity to potentially get into the Hall of Fame. It's on the pre-show. It's a museum. There's the whole PED era, the PEDs versus what Pete Rose did. In my opinion, I think the PEDs warrant not making it into the Hall of Fame. I say that while I do believe that some of those guys are the best players I've ever seen. I think Barry Bonds is the best hitter I've ever seen. Step in a batter's box. There's no doubt about it. PEDs or not, I think he's the best hitter I've ever seen. But obviously those guys had an opportunity to, at least the attempt was there for those guys to get into the Hall of Fame. So in the case of Pete Rose, it's been a long battle. The vitriol obviously was very unfortunate. I can understand the harsh criticism of the off-the-field stuff. He never did himself any favors off the field. I think we can all agree with that one. However, if we're going to give the Hall of Fame induction based off of merit, I think he deserves the consideration. And I'm looking forward to that December 2027 date to see what ultimately happens. And if he does get into Hall of Fame, I fully support it.
Yeah, man, I'm with you on that, Nico. I fully support Pete being in there. I support Shoeless Joe Jackson as well. Jason, you mentioned a few other names associated with the White Sox they're a little more borderline, but I think Joe Jackson deserves to be in statistically as well as Pete Rose. But I also think that it's really important that we and everybody understand what happened here from a historical standpoint. So the White Sox were obviously banned. That whole team was effectively almost erased from history aside from this happened. And I think some folks may not realize the context in which that happened. And this is by no means justifying, this is by no means saying that it was okay. But Shoeless Joe Jackson, for example, got $5,000 to throw the World Series. And he made that year, according to Baseball Reference, sixth. So effectively, he got a year's salary to throw the World Series. And they weren't getting big money to be in the World Series like that. So these are guys who weren't making a ton of money, and his salary's doubled. So if you pay the guy that much, why does he have put up a 956 OPS in the World Series if he's throwing the World Series? He hit 375. He went out there and he played, and he didn't. There was no, by all accounts, there was no obvious effort to throw any of the games by Joe Jackson. He threw out a runner at home plate in game 2 or game 3. So he's out there working hard. I can't speak for the other players. They certainly weren't as big marquee names that have been historically annaled the way that Joe Jackson was. And again, we know he took the money. We know that they did it, that they agreed to do it. So that doesn't create an excuse for him. But at the same time, Joe went out there and played. And the statistics show that he played hard. I think if we look at Pete Rose, if we jump over, Pete played hard every single day. I don't know what his bets were. I don't know if he bet on to win, to lose, or whatever. We know that he admitted to betting on his teams, not just baseball, his teams, that he was in the games. And although he initially denied the idea that he had been doing this for years and years and years, we also know now that he did in fact bet before he was a manager, when he was a player. We know that. And then you throw on top of that the allegations about, from the young girl, and then he admitted to being with the young girl. However, all that being said, if we want to invoke the character clause, where's the line on that stuff? And I say that because as somebody who also sat and watched the Trevor Bauer stuff go down and all of the things Trevor Bauer went through, and in the end, he was completely vindicated, but he's not playing baseball in the United States right now. And I'm not going to argue whether he should be or not. That's not what we're talking about, because I will also argue that he's not really as good a pitcher as he thinks he is. But I know, no, it's true. He thinks he's the best pitcher on the planet. And I'm like, yeah, he'd be a decent number 3 on most teams, maybe. But the bottom line is we are very quick to demonize these guys. We hold them up on such a high pedestal, and as soon as we hear something that doesn't mesh with what we think they should be, we are very quick to throw them to the wolves. And that's what happened with Pete Rose. That's what happened with Trevor Bauer, and it happened with Barry Bonds as well. But just like Pete Rose, Bonds didn't do himself any favors with the media. Nobody likes Barry Bonds. And just like that, nobody likes Pete Rose. The players like Pete Rose. But from a media standpoint, if you listen to Pete talk, it's like, oh my goodness, stop talking. Stop talking. You're not helping yourself. And I think all of that plays into this idea of now what happens next. Rob Manfred was approached by the Rose family when he first became commissioner, because the historical story from Pete was that Bart Giamatti wasn't permanent. That it wasn't supposed to be. That's the story. I don't know if it's true or not. Giamatti's son thinks that Pete should never be allowed in, if you listen to him talk. He says no standing here, but he talks about it. The idea is that Manfred didn't want to overturn something that another commissioner had done and put in place. And so he effectively said, no, I don't think this is a good idea at this time. After Rose passes, the family comes back to him and says, hey, can we revisit this? And Manfred figures this might be a good time to do something here. And by changing the rule that your permanent ban ends on your passing, he has effectively not allowed Pete Rose anything that he isn't allowing anybody else. So this isn't the Pete Rose rule. Unlike what the Hall of Fame did right before Rose was eligible to be on the ballot, where they created a rule to keep him out, specifically to keep Pete Rose out of the Hall of Fame. There was no other reason for it. Joe Jackson could have been voted in at any time up until that point. There was no reason they couldn't have. I don't know the history behind why they didn't or why none of that happened. But he never ended up on a ballot as far as I know. But they were dead set against Pete Rose getting into the Hall of Fame. And the reason I'm telling this way is to illustrate how political this all really is. This isn't about baseball. And we want it to be about baseball. Like we do, the 3 of us do, the fans do. Everybody wants to go in and say, who's the all-time hits leader? Why doesn't he have a plaque on the wall? He has a what's it called? There's a display. It shows who the hits leader is, just like Barry Bonds has a display, or not Barry Bonds, but the home run leader display is there. But there's a distinct difference as a fan seeing who the hits leader is and seeing that individual represented in the shrine that we hold dear as the Hall of Fame. And to your point earlier, Nico, without that history in there, without Pete Rose in there, without Joe Jackson in there, without Barry Bonds in there, that museum is now just a collection of moments in the game that are going to go away. If someone hits 74 home runs, 75 home runs, Barry Bonds is gone. He's not there. If somebody eclipses Pete Rose's hit record, he's gone. He's not there anymore. What he did in the game is gone. And isn't that what we want this museum to be, this historical record of the greatest players that ever played the game? And so that's my pitch for that to happen. The reality, like Jason and Diego, both of you said, is that we have to wait until 2027 for the panel to convene. Before all of that happens, the baseball writers will select the players that the committee should consider. In theory, Rose might not even make it through that.
Right.
Jackson may not make it through that. And then we don't know yet who's going to be on that panel of, 16, I think, that vote on that. We have no idea who that's going to be. It's going to be Hall of Famers. It's going to be players, it's going to be some media personnel, and it's different each time. And then they have to get 12 out of those 16 votes to get in. That's going to be very difficult for these guys to do.
Yeah, good stuff, guys. Going back to something you said, Bruce, where's the line on personal behavior? Now, I get it. If we're talking about the off the field a relationship with underage girl, that's definitely over the line. Okay, we can all agree on that. But me and you discussed this the other day, and I said something about it on my Facebook Live. Like, there's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame, and there's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame from times before we had social media, before the media was up these guys' rear end 24 hours a day, trying to catch them doing stuff. Babe Ruth was a kind of a known womanizer during his career. We don't really talk about that, right? And so is that the line? Where's the line where the personal behavior becomes the issue? And I know that the baseball writers and the people in these committees, they look at themselves as the guardians of the game and protecting the game's integrity, and that's fine. We need that. However, at some point, and I've changed my tune on this, by the way, in recent years, at some point, we've got to just accept that the steroid era happened. Barry Bonds is still one of the greatest hitters of all time. He was before the steroids. He just increased his power afterwards and the size of his head. And at some point, again, if we're telling, and I know you could tell the story of baseball, like you said, Bruce, they can have a display in there that shows Pete Rose as the all-time hits leader, and Bonds had the home run record. But it's not the same as actually inducting those guys into the Hall of Fame. And I just think at some point the holier than thou attitude, it wears a little thin because we all make mistakes and we've all fallen short. So I just feel like to tell the story of baseball, it's time. The Black Sox were 1919, guys. It was 106 years ago. Totally different.
I think you bring up a really great point, Jason. The times. You mentioned Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth, womanizer, hot dog eater, beer swiller. He lived his best life, Jason. And he did that every day. But the reality is, at the time, it wasn't looked at exactly the way we look at it now. And I think we have to be able to balance that, because if we look at Babe Ruth, if we look at Ty Cobb, go ahead and just do a Google search on the kind of human being that man was.
Yeah.
And then if we look at, if we jump and look at some of the guys in the 70s, even, these are guys who were taking performance enhancing drugs. They absolutely were. They admit it. And then we jump into the 80s and 90s. If we continually do this and look at the behaviors and what they did on the field, off the field, and when I mean on the field, I mean what they did to perform on the field. So it might have been greenies, it might have been reds, all those things. But the point is that we have to be very careful right now with the lenses that we look back on history, and we compare Trevor Bauer to Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb was known to have been with underage women. Now, Trevor Bauer was not. So these are different problems from a human behavior standpoint, but they're still unacceptable to us today. In the way they described it anyway. Again, the Bauer thing, it is a totally different conversation, but it's not when you compare it to Pete Rose. Pete Rose, if he's telling the truth, which we're not sure that he is, I mean, we don't know. Did he know the girl was under 16? So we all look at it and go, 16, who cares? What are you doing with a 16-year-old? You're a grown man. But that was the age of consent. So if she's 16, then while we will still damn him for doing it, it's not illegal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to just be careful how we apply it.
No, I agree. Just in fairness to the audience, it's still icky regardless. But yes.
No, that's what I'm saying. Point. It's not okay, but it's also not illegal.
To your point, Bruce, the Black Sox were acquitted in court. They weren't convicted. That's
an excellent point. Yeah. No.
I don't know. It's not a black and white issue, and to try to, I saw so many comments that were just vitriolic and judgmental, and I mean, you talk about the performance enhancing stuff before the PEDs. I mean, in the 1980s, are you telling me there weren't several baseball players, doing a little coke? Right? It's the 80s. You got lots of money. You got disposable income. Yeah, I mean, so it's not black and white. It's a difficult issue. I do think as human beings we take ourselves too seriously sometimes too. At the end of the day, who is it going to hurt to put these guys in the baseball Hall of Fame? We're not talking about one of them becoming the Pope, right? And that's a whole nother story. But I just feel like to tell the story of baseball, they need to be in there. Nico, you got anything else on this?
Yeah, I want to point out one thing that I thought was, kind of severe when it comes to Pete Rose. So obviously, the guys that got caught doing the PEDs, Bonds, McGuire, they still worked in baseball. They still, and I think Bonds is with the San Francisco Giants. Mark McGuire was the hitting coach for the Cardinals. So you saw that these guys who clearly were on PEDs and got caught were still able to be part of the game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I agree with that. They should still be able to be part of the game. They played the game. They were great players. But in the case of Pete Rose, they alienated him from baseball. He couldn't work in a professional organization. He aspired to. They just made it very difficult for him to be involved in the game in any way. It took years before he was even on the TBS playoff broadcast with Alex Rodriguez, which I thought was great. I mean, Pete Rose has tons of baseball knowledge. And it took years and years and years for them to sort of ease Pete back into the game, to have a voice in the game. And I think it's unfortunate that they did that to him while allowing so many other guys who, again, PEDs versus gambling, it's two separate issues. But I think it's a stain that baseball alienated Pete from having a voice in the game and being part of an organization. And yeah, that's my final thought on that. And I just would like to see Pete have a chance to be part of baseball in his latter years, rather than, like Bruce said, every time he spoke, you just wanted to tell him, like, Pete, be quiet, and he always liked to give it back to them too. He always liked to do autographs outside of the Hall of Fame, when they had the Hall of Fame, the inductions for the players they got voted in. So he always gave it back to baseball just as much as baseball alienated him. It was an unfortunate relationship, in totality for the last, 25, 30 years. So that's what I have on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that, Nico. But I think we need to make an important distinction for everybody and understand that what Pete did was banned at the game when he did it. A lot of these guys who did PEDs, it wasn't. That's not justifying it. It's not saying it's okay.
Right.
But what it is saying is that these guys, very much like the Astros, these guys didn't do anything that was written that was wrong at the time. And the players' union would have stood behind them and made it literally impossible for the commissioner or the league to do anything about that. They couldn't ban them. They couldn't do those things to strike them down. Pete clearly violated a rule. He clearly violated the series rule, and then he sat down with the commissioner and agreed to the ban.
Yeah.
So
right.
Now, again, my understanding is he didn't understand it was for life, whatever. I don't know. It doesn't matter at this point. But that's a really big distinction between PEDs and the betting. The PEDs weren't banned until later. The devices and the way the Astros operated weren't addressed until after. So we can say it's cheating. We can say all those things. Technically, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Again, it's a technicality, and I get that, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm justifying it. But that's the reality of why Barry Bonds is a hitting coach, and Pete Rose never was.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's just I know how social media is, and everybody always, when I say things like this, well, you should know, social media is a reflection of society, though. I mean, it's not like all these social media posts are from robots. I mean, some of them are, I guess, but these are human beings that are like super vitriolic and judgmental about something. And I'm just thinking, man, what's in your closet? You're getting on social media, you're awful brave to make these comments. It's the same. I consider it in the same disease, if you will, when we post something positive about Aaron Judge or Shohei, and immediately somebody's pointing out, Aaron Judge's postseason shortcomings or Shohei strikes out a lot. I'm like, guys, how many 98-mile-per-hour fastballs have you knocked over the fence, right? I'm hesitant to criticize these guys. Even my own team, I get frustrated with them, and I'm like, why does Austin Riley continually swing at that pitch 4 feet outside the zone? But I've never tried to hit that pitch. I've never tried. I would probably swing at that same pitch. So I think this is really good, guys. This is something we can come back to. I'm sure this story is far from over. In fact, since that committee doesn't meet until 2027,
it's just starting.
God willing, we'll have many more episodes, and that will come up again, and we will definitely get back to it. But I do want to, have some time for our audience so we can recap the week that was and talk about some things going on in Major League Baseball. Some interesting stuff today as we record this on Sunday. The Angels sweep the Dodgers. I'm still trying to process that. Once again, Paul Skeens is brilliant and loses a 1-0 game. Yeah, the Braves came back and after a heartbreaking, ridiculous loss last night and win the series from the Red Sox. The Twins finally lost a baseball game, guys. The Twins lost today. And in honor of Seattle, the Mariners swept the Padres at Petco this weekend. So a lot to digest, and let's dive right in. Nico, what's on your mind about the American League this past week?
So with the American League, I want to start out with the firing of Brandon Hyde in Baltimore. Obviously, it's been a really poor start for Baltimore this season, and I thought about it, and I really don't understand the firing. Baltimore came into the season with glaring holes. The starting pitching wasn't there, and then when you accompany that with some of these young guys who just aren't producing like they were in years past, and I'm talking about Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, Cedric Mullins is struggling as of late, and I'm starting to see a little bit of a pattern here in baseball. We have our third manager fired, and it's May 18th. It's only May 18th, and you're starting to see that these general managers are sort of off the hook, and it seems like sort of the tendency right now is, hey, if we fall behind, we're going to fire the manager. So I think the firing of Brandon Hyde was it's not shocking. The Orioles keep losing. They actually just lost their 30th game today. Imagine that, Bruce, 30th game with, they're approaching, White Sox territory when it comes to their wins and losses, in the win-loss column. So I'm a bit surprised with that. I don't know where
Nico, are you tempted to say that the White Sox might end up with a better record than the Orioles?
No. I'm not there yet, but my question is where does Baltimore go from here? Are they just going to kind of let the rest of the season sort of play out? I know it's May 18th, and they can always go on a little bit of a streak, but they don't have the pitching. You know what I mean? They don't have the pitching. The guys, Zach Eflin came back and he didn't pitch very well, and Grayson Rodriguez, like we've talked about in other episodes, he's we don't know when he's coming back, and the young guys are not they're not producing like they were in the last couple of years. But it's interesting. Brandon Hyde won the AL Manager of the Year 2 years ago, and he went to the playoffs last year. They won over 90 games last year. I think it has a lot to do with those 2 quick playoff exits.
I agree with you there, Nico. I mean, he can't win a playoff game, right? That's the cloak he's wearing right now. Is he can win 95 games in the regular season, and then he starts off like this. So he's an easy scapegoat, I think. That's what I think Elias should have done more in the offseason. You said that. Absolutely. But let's fire him and see what happens. Maybe they go on a run and go out and get some pitching.
Yeah. I mean, pitching wins, right? Pitching wins championships like we talked about. So it's a tough time in Baltimore. But with that being said, I want to hop to Boston. The Red Sox struggling. 2 games under 500. They got beat up today by Atlanta. Atlanta took 2 out of 3. And, right now, Boston's it's been 2021 was their last playoff appearance. 2023, they won 78 games. They won 78 games 2 years in a row. This is the Boston Red Sox we're talking about. You know what I mean? This is a team that we should be talking about in the same vein as the New York Yankees, the LA Dodgers. This is a big market team, and they have just been living in mediocrity now for several years. And now I'm starting to wonder, is Alex Cora going to be the next manager who could see the door? They're not responding to him. They're not winning ball games. They're not winning series. I know the Rafi Devers situation has been a distraction, but he's been thriving in the midst of it. I mean, he's the hottest guy at the plate right now for Boston. So I'm looking at Boston, and I'm starting to, I can feel the frustration of the fan base. The fans are frustrated in Boston. They're not winning. They can't get over 500. They can't get over the hump. You look at Atlanta, they scratched and clawed their way back to 500, and now they're finally over 500. And Boston hasn't done that yet. They haven't gotten on that roll. We keep saying, hey, Boston's going to finally start, we're going to start to see the fruits of the labor of that team, and it hasn't happened. So I'm just curious to see what's going to happen with Cora. They signed him to an extension until 2027, and like we talked about, they love him out there. But this is Boston. This is a big market, and if things continue to go in this trajectory, he could be the odd man out there.
Well, Nico, do you remember the Jose Contreras story? But the story went that the Yankees and the Red Sox are courting Jose Contreras out of Cuba, this 30-whatever-year-old pitcher who was supposed to be the second coming of Cy Young, and the Red Sox had a deal done with him. He just hadn't signed it yet. And the Yankees went and knocked on his door and effectively said, "What are they offering you? We'll pay you more." And he signed with the Yankees. The Red Sox called the next morning ready to do the deal, and Jose tells them, I'm a Yankee. That was when the Red Sox turned the corner and said, we're going to do that too. We're going to operate like that. We're going to spend the money. We're going to chase the talent. And that turned into those teams that were so good, where they were spending that money and they were winning. And Theo Epstein built that empire. And yeah, he spent a good amount of money. And then when he goes to Chicago, the Red Sox decided, we don't want to do that anymore. We're not going to spend any money anymore. We're going to get rid of anybody we think is going to cost us a crap ton of money and try to get talent for them. We're not going to re-sign Mookie Betts. We're going to try and get talent for him instead. And for whatever reason, they decided to keep Rafi Devers, which was a great choice because he's certainly one of the elite players in the game. But they get rid of him. They get rid of Xander Betts. They get rid of Bogarts because they don't think he's worth it. But they decided all of that and then turned around and signed Chris Sale to this huge crippling contract. Well, they did that kind of as they were deciding not to spend money. And the Sale contract puts them over the edge because Sale doesn't perform. Sale gets hurt. What do you have? I think I had 2 good years in Boston, maybe. I'm not looking at it. And he effectively put the nail in the coffin on the Red Sox being a competitive, big money market team. They're not that. They haven't been that for years. But now that they've turned over GMs, they've decided they want to try it again. But that takes time. You can't do it in 2 years. And that's effectively where we are, I think. I think we're at a place for the Red Sox where they're just not there yet with spending the money to keep the talent and building that talent. They just haven't quite gotten it. I think it requires patience. Don't fire Cora. He's a good manager. I think he's a good manager. In spite of what he has actually, we know that he did in relation to the Astros scandal. And then on top of that, you're going to compound the idea of what happened to the Red Sox in the playoffs with that scorekeeper. Someone involved with the media, with the tablets and the media. I forget who it was now, who was actually found to have done it, but Cora wasn't directly linked to it. But there's still question marks around it. Nonetheless, I still think he's a good manager. I still think they can build that team. Boston fans, be patient. That's what I say. This is a decent team, and I do think they still have a shot at the playoffs. And keep Cora. That's what I think. It's a big market that doesn't want to spend like that.
Yeah, I feel like for years, the NFL and the NHL particularly have used head coaches as scapegoats when
Yeah.
organizations don't provide what's needed. I mean, how many head coaches have the Cleveland Browns been through, and how much of that was the coach's fault, right? I feel like the same thing's starting to happen in baseball now. What are you going to gain by firing Cora? What are the Orioles gaining? That was a scapegoat move all the way. We know that. Trying to save some face on a disappointing season where you're right, Nico. The GM didn't go out and address the issues. I'm not a big believer that managers make a ton of difference. I'm not saying they don't make any difference, but they don't hit, they don't catch, they don't pitch. The guys, these professional athletes, got to go out and perform. But the GM also has to get the quality professional athletes to help them, and he did not do that. And to blame it on the manager, I feel like what's going to be gained there. The Red Sox are still in second place, but the entire NL East, other than the Yankees, is under 500. That's not something I thought we would see this deep into the season.
With Boston, I think the Chaim Bloom era really threw them backwards. He was very resistant to spend. Let's not forget he was a Tampa Bay Ray guy. He was down there in their front office.
Right, Nico, but remember, that's why they brought him in. They brought him in. That's exactly why Chaim Bloom was hired, to not spend money. It's not Bloom's fault, is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, we'll see how he does in St. Louis next year, but I do think that I agree with you, Bruce. It's going to take time, but I do think that, again, you're talking about Boston. It's the same thing as New York. You have to win, otherwise they make changes. That's the way it is in this market. So I'm looking at the Red Sox and the struggles, and just continue to ask myself, are they going to finally get into that gear and win 3, 4, 5 games in a row and start to show some of that quality in the lineup and in the rotation. And then I'd also like to talk Detroit Tigers, best record in baseball, 31 wins, just absolutely dominating week in and week out. And it's starting to come as a surprise. I think
the NL West, Nico? Is that the toughest division in baseball, or is the NL West? What do you think?
Well, you've got 4 teams over 500, and same as the NL West. They're making a good case. At least it's the best division in the American League at the moment. And right now, the AL East is looking like the worst division in baseball. You know what I mean? It's like Jason said. You got besides the Yankees, everyone else is under 500, and you don't really expect too much out of Tampa. Maybe Toronto. I know Bruce doesn't believe in Toronto too much. I don't either. But yeah, the AL East is making a case for the worst division in baseball, as we sit here on the 18th of May.
I'm with you, Nico. I'm with you.
Yeah. And then I'd like to give a couple players of the week for the American League. I want to start out with actually Rafi Devers. He seems to be thriving with all of that attention that he's garnering on himself, that negative attention. He had that that solo walk-off on last night. Sorry, Jason. But Rafi Devers has been absolutely on fire for the Red Sox. Just imagine what that team would be like without him. I mean, he really is carrying that lineup. And then also wanted to talk about Jacob deGrom. Really healthy deGrom is back, just absolutely dominating in that Texas uniform for the Rangers. I wanted to pull up some of his stats here. Bear with me.
Let's keep him healthy. I'll say that while you're pulling up the stats, Nico. Let's
keep him
healthy.
Yeah. On a side note, how many former Mets just continue to blossom in their history? They are just
Zach Wheeler and Jacob deGrom. If deGrom stays healthy, he's one of the best pitchers in the American League consistently. We know Wheeler has been the bridesmaid the last couple of years in the Cy Young. When's his time? I don't know. It could be this year, but Skeens looked really good today.
So for all of our Mets fans, sign Pete Alonso. Don't let him walk.
He's walking, Nico. He's walking.
For some reason they just have they have a gripe with him. I don't know why. I'm not sure. I think Dave Stearns just doesn't want to extend a 31-year-old first baseman. It just seems like it's just not in his nature. But
I think Pete fell victim to Juan Soto, and I'm not being sarcastic about that. I think the Mets made it clear that Soto was a priority, and they kept telling Pete, listen, we're going to get to you. And it took the shine off of anything that Pete Alonso was going to get. And then he waited so deep into free agency, the money was gone from other teams. I said this, I think I might have said it in our chat. Why didn't the Orioles chase a Pete Alonso instead of Tyler O'Neill? Tyler O'Neill is never going to be the guy who's going to carry the team, but Pete will. And it would have cost you a little bit more money. Sure, it would have. But it would have given you the aircraft carrier in your lineup. And I think Pete signed with the Mets because he didn't have other options. And next year, he's going to have options. He's going to walk, and the highest bidder is going to get one of the best hitting first basemen in baseball. That's what I think is going to happen.
I think he wants to retire a Met. I really do.
I think he did. I don't know if he still does.
I think he enjoys playing there, and he can play so well in that market. It's a lion's den out there, and he thrives in it. So I think I hope he stays in with the Mets, because if he doesn't, it'll just add to that long list of players that left New York and went on to have a better career, like we just talked about. Seth Lugo is another one. Seth Lugo went on and had a nice career after his Mets tenure.
Well, he was one of the guys that carried the Royals last year, right? That pitching staff. Seth Lugo went and effectively had a career year last year, 16-9. He started 33 games. He never started more. He started 26 the year before with San Diego. But this is a guy who, if you asked me before last year, he's a number 4, maybe number 3 on a bad team. And he carries the Royals last year along with Michael Wacha. I don't want to discount Wacha's contribution. But who would have predicted that? He's had a middling career until last year, and this year he's having a nice season too. Maybe he just loves Kansas City. Maybe that's his town. I don't know. But when he was with the Mets, he was just okay out of the bullpen. Who knew, right? But we knew Zach Wheeler was going to be good when he left the Mets.
Yep. So
yeah, let's revisit the Minnesota Twins really quick. We're up against it a little bit, probably running over, but Minnesota Twins won 13 straight. They did lose today as we record. They had pitched 3 consecutive shutouts, 13 straight wins. They've jumped to second in that crazy AL Central, still 5 back of the Tigers. But are we buying this run by the Twins, or is this one of those anomalies and they're going to fall back again? Like, I'm starting to believe a little more in the Twins than I am the Guardians, who've been stumbling on some hard times here lately. What do you guys think?
Depends on what you mean by believing,
Guardians,
Jason.
I mean, I think they could hang around in the wild card. They're not going to challenge the Tigers. I think the Tigers are going to win the Central. They're going to, They might be the best team in the AL, but I think the Twins can hang around in the wild card race.
Well, let's see when Correa comes back. He is on concussion protocol. Let's assume that that's all it is, and he's back by next week. If not, I don't know how much I believe in the team at all. We don't know that, is what I'm saying. Is we don't know what's going to happen.
I see where you're coming from. Yeah, I've seen the inconsistency with Cleveland, and to a certain extent, Kansas City. They had that great run, but before that, and here recently, they did win today and salvaged a game against the Cardinals. But and by the way, Bruce, your question earlier, I've been looking at it. I might be willing, maybe not quite yet, but I might be willing to take the White Sox as having a better record than the Orioles. I mean,
I asked the question just to ask the question because the Orioles on paper are a better and more talented team, but they're certainly not playing that way. And do you believe Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, and the young core are all of a sudden just going to wake up and remember that they're actually good without somebody helping them do that, and there's nobody there to help? That's my concern.
The Blue Jays broadcast team, I was watching them yesterday, I guess it was. They were discussing, I don't know how they got on the subject of the Orioles, but they were discussing, did the Orioles run Adley Rutschman into the ground? Did they play him? Did they start him too much at catcher? Because his numbers have fallen off the cliff.
No.
And I haven't looked to see, how many games he started at catcher the last couple of years, but that might be a valid point because it's hard to be a catcher. It's hard.
It's hard to be a catcher, and that's why, that's one reason why Bryce Harper wasn't a catcher. He came up as a catcher, and the Nationals said, you know what? That's not the best place for you. We need you in the lineup every day, swinging that bat the way we need you to swing it. Did the Orioles overplay Rutschman? I mean, you're talking about a guy who's 26 or 27.
Probably, yeah.
Who's, I mean, he caught he played. I don't have the catching stats, but I'm going to assume he caught the majority of 154 games in 2023, 148 last year. Should he be given some more time off in between? Maybe get a couple of days off a week instead of maybe that might be a valid point and concern. But he's 27. This is when you do this, because when he's 32, he can't. He's 33. You're going to run into a JT Realmuto situation where JT now struggles to catch 5-6 times a week and produce at the plate, and then that's what happens to catchers, right? Their offense starts to decline because the physicality of catching catches up with them, and they stay in the game because they're still good catchers. They're still great catchers, and the team keeps them in the lineup because of that. So are we changing the way we deal with catchers, the way we've changed the way we deal with pitchers? Because I'll tell you, the way we deal with pitchers hasn't yielded any results at all. Everyone still gets hurt. Everyone still has short careers. So pulling them out after 100 pitches or 5 innings all the time hasn't helped at all. So is the question, so what is the question? The question is, are we overplaying them, or are we training them wrong? Is the training appropriate? Or do we think we know more science about this than we do? So that's kind of the way I see it. I don't think we're overplaying Adley Rutschman at all. I think that team lacks leadership. There's no maturity in the clubhouse. There's no leadership there. And when a kid like Adley Rutschman or Gunnar Henderson gets in a slump, who's there to help him throw it? Nobody.
And no offense to Adley, he may bounce back from this, but he wouldn't be the first youngster to come up like gangbusters, and then the league figures him out. They know how to get him out, and kind of fades away a little bit. So yeah, it definitely. I just thought that was interesting.
Well, what's a good thing to say, Jason, too, about Adley Rutschman? And I love the kid. I think he's a fantastic player. I mean, in 2023, he hit 20 home runs and his OPS was 809. That's good.
Yeah,
it's not elite.
It's not.
It's not. So, but then that's his best season. So is that his peak? I mean, I don't know if it is, but if it is, that's okay. But I think the Orioles need him to be a 4-WAR guy, not a 1.5 WAR guy, which is kind of where he's heading this year.
Agreed. Yeah. Okay.
I think everything that could go wrong in Baltimore has gone wrong.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right, Nico. Charlie Morton decided he couldn't pitch anymore. You mentioned Rodriguez getting hurt. Everything's going wrong there. Everything.
And then like we talked about, the young core there took a step back. Gunner's kind of, he's coming back a little bit as of the last week or so. But I just curious how this team moves forward. If they're gonna, like you said, Bruce, they're gonna need to add a veteran leader in that clubhouse. Looking into next year, because they don't have it, and O'Neill hasn't been it.
I think you made a good point earlier, and he goes, what do they do with this season? You mentioned something on that line. And I think the worst thing that could happen to them is to go on a little run. If they go on a little run, they might start believing they can grab that third wild card. And this happens to teams every single year. They think they can make the playoffs on that third wild card. If they just make it, they could possibly go further. So they don't sell, or they don't make a trade, or they don't do things that would actually make the team better next year and the year after that. And then they wallow in mediocrity for several seasons after that. So I hope that doesn't happen in Baltimore. I hope they make the moves they need to make the team better. Same thing along the lines with what we were kind of throwing around with Pittsburgh last week. We're trading Paul Skeens. Nobody wants to hear about it, but it's the best thing for the team.
Right.
All right, let's talk some National League. Bruce, what you got for us?
Yeah, so we can absolutely start with Paul Skeens, because I had the pleasure of sitting in Citizens Bank Park today and watching Mick Abel make his major league debut against Paul Skeens, hoping upon hope that Abel was going to be the guy the Phillies hope he is, and put up a good show against the guy that I knew was going to go out there and perform, Paul Skeens. And it was everything I hoped it would be between these two guys. 18 strikeouts combined between the two pitchers in this game, a 1-0 game. And you guys know there's nothing I love more than a 1-0 game when there's good baseball being played. And this was a good, solid game of baseball. There was no poor defense, no poor offense. The strikeouts weren't guys just swinging at everything. These were two guys throwing bullets and hitting corners and getting ground balls when they needed to get the ground balls to get a double play. It was just a great baseball game. And all I could think the entire time was, how much of this is Paul Skeens going to put up with before he walks into somebody's office and says, trade me? How many 1-0 games can you lose? 2-1 games can you lose when you strike out 9 guys and all you need is your offense to do a little bit against a kid that's never done this before, that you could maybe potentially easily rattle in some way, but you don't have the tools to do it. And that's the Pittsburgh Pirates story, is they don't have the tools to be competitive. They don't have the tools to support the pitching staff that isn't bad at all. Between Skeens, Falter, and Heaney and Keller, you have 4 pitchers who are more than serviceable. Heaney and so Skeens' ERA is what, 2.4. Heaney and Falter is in the 3s. And I think Keller's just over 4. That's a good rotation, especially for that division. They need to do something in Pittsburgh to win these games. We know they've got the money. We know they've got the resources. They need to do something to make this happen. And they can do it. They're just not. And that's just a shame. Skeens is not going to be a Pirate for very much longer. I guarantee it. But come one way or the other, it's going to happen. So that's a shame. I hate to see it, but I really enjoyed watching him pitch today.
Yeah, I love a good
One
pitcher.
start there.
That's an awesome day at the ballpark for sure.
I also want to talk a little bit about some guys who put up some nice performances. I don't want to talk too much about teams because I think we're at a point in the season with these teams in the standings where we're starting to see the schedule dictate standings. Nico, I think you had mentioned something about the Royals going on a little run, and then they've come back a little bit. And that's what we're seeing. The Royals went on a run against really weak teams for the most part. And they played some really good baseball. And now they're playing the Cardinals, who are hot. And we talked about that last week, that the Cardinals are hot. So now they're playing more competitive teams, and we're starting to see that the Royals aren't necessarily an elite team. We knew that before. But the Cardinals aren't either. So it's a really evenly matched series, I think, between them. And it was a good series, I thought, between the Cardinals and the Royals. But the reality is we're seeing the Dodgers, the Padres, and the Giants scuffling a little bit in the West. But we know the Dodgers and the Padres are good teams. We know they're not gonna scuffle for that long. And in the East, I don't know what to make of the Braves. Jason, we talk about them over and over again. Who are they? They're over 500. Yay! But I don't know. I don't know what else to do with it.
I don't either.
Will they continue in a positive manner? They're plus 11 now with their run differential. That's great, but are they better than the Nationals? I don't know that, which is hard to say and hard to think about. But the Nationals aren't as bad as everybody thinks either. And the Phillies and the Mets, it's their division. I said it last week. It's their division to fight for, and they're doing a pretty darn good job of it. The Mets ran into the Yankees this week, which was a really good series. I enjoyed that quite a bit, watching some of that. So I don't want to get too hung up in the standings right now. And so I think aside from the Braves, there aren't any teams that are surprisingly bad like the Orioles in the American League, where we don't know what to do with them. And the Braves are kind of treading water, even being not great. So I think from a standing standpoint, I want to let it breathe before I talk more about who's great and who's not, because we're starting to see divisions outside the West shake themselves out in a natural way. But I do want to mention Wilmer Flores on the Giants. That 3 home run performance on the 17th. I want to make sure we talk about that a little bit, because Wilmer Flores, do we all remember what year was that? Wilmer Flores, or maybe it was 2018, when Flores was with the Mets, and he heard he was going to be traded in the middle of a game, and he's crying on the field. Well, this same guy is out there in San Francisco putting up numbers this year, guys. He is out there helping to carry this team. And the Mets don't have that sort of guy on their team right now. Francisco Lindor is doing a fantastic job with the Mets. Alonso's having a close to MVP year. And of course, Juan Soto is a big cog in that wheel. But Wilmer Flores would have been a really great guy to have on this Mets team right now, too. Plug him in at second base or third base. He would do a great job. And he at age 33, he's showing them, what they're missing in some respects. And I wanted to make sure to point that out because I really root for guys like that who are out there. They grit it out over season. I also want to mention Max Muncy, who has had a pretty nice week along with Shohei. Shohei had another 2-home run game this week, even though the Dodgers were sliding a little bit over there in the LA versus LA series. Shohei still had a decent week. I love to call out these guys who are on absolutely awful teams. Jordan Beck had a 2-home run game earlier in the week in Colorado, and Ezekiel Tovar in Colorado had a 5-hit game, same game. Colorado put up some runs. You think you mentioned that earlier, Jason, or maybe it was before the show.
Yeah.
Along with Hunter Goodman. So Colorado getting a little bit of joy. Love to see when teams like that get a little bit of joy. I also want to mention one more guy before I talk a little bit about pitching. Bryce Harper starting to wake up a little bit in Philadelphia. Had a 3-hit game earlier in the week with a few RBIs in the game. His OPS is now around that 800 mark. He's got 7 home runs. His batting average is still a little bit low for Bryce, but he's starting to wake up a little bit. I like to see that in Bryce because he's a very emotional player. He's a guy that gets into the game and keys in, but when he's not keyed in an emotional level, he can wallow a lot. And I think he's starting to come out of that wallowing that he's been doing for weeks now that caused him to cut his hair. Bad look, Bryce, by the way. I just want to say that officially.
He's had some rough looks.
Yeah. So I did talk about Skeens pitching and Nick Abel. Welcome to
Let me help
Big
you out
League.
real quick, Bruce. Sorry. Since you're going into Skeens, I looked it up. He's already had 12 games that he lost where he allowed 3 earned runs or less.
And that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. How much can you do that as a human being?
That's not even 2 full seasons. Obviously, not even a season and a half. That's 12 games. I think Nolan Ryan's the all-time leader there with nearly 200. But if you think about how short a time Skeens has been playing, that's a lot. That's a lot.
And I think Paul Skeens is at least on a cursory level aware that he doesn't want to be Nolan Ryan.
Yeah.
We can argue back and forth about whether Ryan should have won the Cy Young in 73. I'll say he should have won it. I get why he didn't, but I still think he should have won it. And there was another season 2 where he was right there. But the reality is that we're going to talk about that ad nauseum. Fact of the matter is he never won a Cy Young award. And because of and that's one reason people look and will say, why are you talking about him like he's one of the all-time greats? He's not. I'll argue he is. We can talk about this for days about why he is. But the fact of the matter is, he doesn't have the black ink that you want him to have to say that. And I don't think Paul Skeens wants to be that guy. So and he's stuck right now in Pittsburgh. So where's his path forward? I don't know because I'll tell you Paul Skeens the Pirates should trade him. It'll improve the team very easily to trade Skeens. They're never going to do it. I don't see it. But I want to welcome Nick Abel to the big leagues too at the same time with this fantastic performance that Mick had today. I hope it continues. And then I hope the Phillies call up Andrew Painter next month and he does the same thing. What were you going to say, Nico?
Yeah, I think I agree with you on the Paul Skeens situation because, you make a great point. How much does keeping Paul Skeens really change the narrative in Pittsburgh? The chances are they're not going to build around him. They're not going to improve that lineup. And, he could warrant a huge haul of talent, maybe, a record-setting haul of talent that we've never seen.
What would you trade for Paul Skeens, Nico? Almost anything, right? Not anything, but almost.
Yeah, I mean.
Would you clean out your farm system? You might.
I mean, whoever would potentially do it would be mortgaging their future on it, but it's worth it. You're talking about, there's only one Paul Skeens, and we don't know when we're going to get another one. It's ironic that we had Garrett Cole in Pittsburgh, and now we have Paul Skeens, and it seems like they're both going to be on the same path, unfortunately. But I agree with you. But if they do trade him, whether it's this year or 2 years from now, it's just going to further alienate that fan base. Their instant reaction is going to be they're going to be pissed off, they're going to be upset, but they'll get over it, like you said, because it's the Pirates, and they
Well,
continue
if you make the playoffs next year, if you're that third wild card of the Pirates, because you got 2 or 3 major league ready bats who are young and experienced, but they put up just enough to eke in, the fan base forgets about Paul Skeens. I think they do. And that's my pitch. I think just winning
will understand. Yeah.
The
smart baseball fans will understand what they're doing if they do it.
And Pirates fans love the team. They do.
Yeah.
But they want to win.
You already know that, by July 31, the rumors are going to heat up and they're going to be making phone calls and there's going to be a lot of chatter about it. We'll see if they do it, if they actually are, willing to make that sort of splash, this early on in his career. It'll be, great for the show and great to talk about, but it makes all the sense. I think the Yankees would be a great trade partner. They would. It would be.
The Yankees have the talent they don't need to make it work. I think they do. Because if you subtract, we talked about it a little bit last week. If you subtract Jason Dominguez from that lineup, and you subtract Spencer Jones from AAA, and throw in, I don't know, someone maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say George Lombard, but let's just say that for argument's sake, right? How much worse are the Yankees now? They're not really that much worse. I mean, the offense takes a little hit because Dominguez isn't there, but it's just a little hit. The Dominguez OPS isn't even 800 last time I looked.
The trade-off would be well worth it for sure.
Right. Well, the trade-off would be worth it. That pitching staff would be unhittable.
Let's put it like this, guys. The Yankees haven't won a World Series since 2009.
That's a long time for Yankees fans.
It's a long time, and if they do, lug out. If they do lug out all that talent, the Yankees fans won't care because they'll have Paul Skeens. It won't matter at all for the Yankees.
Well, you'll have a pitching staff that's actually going to make it through the postseason, not make bonehead plays at first base like Garrett Cole did. Because I watched Paul Skeens make the play at first base today. I watched him run over there when he didn't even need to be there because he thought maybe he needed to be there. Skeens is a gamer. He plays, but he plays it smart. I'm not saying Cole's not a gamer. Cole goes out there. He wants to win every time he takes the mound. Don't misunderstand me. But he's not that smart on the field. He plays hard. He tries hard, but he makes mistakes that a guy at that level maybe shouldn't make as much. And he's not a leader.
Skeens and Fried could get you through a playoff.
Sure,
they could carry you.
And Heel's going to be back. So if Heel is the guy he was last year on top of that, how do you get through those 3 in the playoffs?
Yeah,
it's real hard. It's real hard. And they have a really good bullpen too.
Yeah.
Devin Williams notwithstanding, but I think Williams will end up being okay.
He's pitching a lot better in the setup role now that they took him out of the closer
and
role.
I think that's working for him. Yeah.
I think Luke Weaver should be closing for them, and it makes all the sense.
0.44 or something silly like that, Weaver?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
he's been great for them since he stepped into the role last fall. It's been great.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Nico. I am. Let's talk about another reliever who's making a bounce back. Jordan Romano in Philadelphia. His last 7 games, he has given up 0 earned runs. His WHIP is .57. He's got 10 strikeouts in 7 innings. Romano is back, and I watched him strike out the side. It's the Pirates, fine, whatever. But I watched him strike out the side in 9th inning, and his stuff was sharp, crisp. It popped. He looked really good, guys, today. And I want to make sure that I say that because in Philadelphia here, we've been very critical of Romano because of really how god-awful he's been. The one thing we haven't mentioned yet is Jose Alvarado's 80-game suspension for PEDs, which hurts the Phillies quite a bit. But Romano's performance is taking a little bit of the sting out of it. but they Phillies still have to fill a role in that bullpen that's been very up and down all season, and Alvarado has been very good. Maybe Romano is healthy, confident, and the guy that Phillies wanted him to be when they signed him, and that would be fantastic for Phillies fans. I don't know, back and forth on how Chris Sale has been this year. Had a real nice performance this week, 7 innings with 8 strikeouts against was it against Boston, right? I don't have that in front of me.
Yes.
Yes, I think it was, which is fantastic for him. Love to see the revenge start against your former team where you didn't perform. Let's be honest, Sale didn't live up to his contract there, but they also kicked him to the curb like yesterday's trash. And he wins the Cy Young and then comes back to Boston and says, look, I'm actually pretty good again. So I want to make sure we mention that as well. I mentioned Zach Wheeler, I think, multiple times, but we don't talk about him here on the podcast. But Zach is just the guy who goes out and does it every single time. 6 innings, 6 strikeouts, no earned run performance early in the week. So that was really great. Nick Pivetta out in San Diego, in spite of San Diego's difficulties, he had a nice start. He gave up 1 run and 6 on over 7. I want to talk about it just because San Diego's been scuffling a little bit. And Pivetta put in his work to try and get the Padres back on track a little bit. So I want to talk about that too.
Yeah. So a couple things. I'll ask the same question really quick, guys. You're gonna have fun editing this episode, Bruce. Same thing we did in the American League with the Twins. What about the Cardinals? They lost today, but they're still pretty hot. You guys buying the Cardinals as long-term contenders?
I am not. No, I still think we're gonna go on throughout the season, and we're gonna look back and say, hey, remember when the Cardinals went on that streak? And I think that even if they're hovering around 500, or even let's say 5 games over 500 come the deadline, my question to you guys is, are they still going to sell some of those veteran players, Arenado, Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, or do you think they're going to stand pat? My argument is I still think they're going to sell.
I have to agree with you, Nico. I think the Cardinals could hover around that 3rd wild card. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I think 90% of the teams could hover around that 3rd wild card, which again, I think is bad for the game, but that's a different topic for a different day. I agree. I think the Cardinals end up sliding back a little bit because, at the end of the day, everybody plays in the back of the baseball card, and these guys are going to start doing that again. But I don't think they're as bad as we think they were. Like, we thought they were going to be a last place team. Maybe they're a little bit better than that. I think that Nolan Arenado is going to get traded for sure. He's having a decent season. He's showing, hey, I can still hit a little bit. And I think that makes him marketable. And I don't think the Cardinals front office is dumb enough to hang on to him just because maybe they'll make a 3rd wild card. I think they're smarter than that, and they're going to move him. And I think that the Yankees might bite because the Yankees need a 3rd baseman now.
Shocker.
Well, they do. I mean, the guy snapped.
Cabrera
snapped
the
his
Yankees
ankle.
would make a big
that was a
trade deadline pickup. So unlikely.
Well, that might be it, though, Jason. It might not be this huge splash, but it might be a guy with a great glove and a decent enough bat to get him by.
Yeah.
Until they can get healthy.
All right, some odds and ends, and we'll wrap it up. So I will say the Jekyll and Hyde Reds are back at 500. They've won 4 in a row. They're back at 24-24. So they're still a wild card player. They're 30 plus 30 run differential too.
I think they're similar to the Cardinals with the Reds. I think they're back and forth and up and down, and they're going to hover. That's what I think is going to happen.
I agree. I will say this, in the preseason, when we were doing our preseason picks and looking at the teams, our previews, I thought, that Cardinal lineup isn't bad, especially if Arenado's hitting. That Cardinal lineup's not bad. I just didn't think they'd have enough pitching to carry them through. But a couple of things, I'll push back a little for our Braves fans, since I am one. And I can talk about this on my brand new Braves podcast. So if you're listening and you're a Braves fan, check it out. The Braves are playing 600 ball since the 0-7 start. They are now in the positive, 11 run differential. They've scored 12 runs less than the Nats, but they've given up 72 less. So I don't expect the Nats to catch the Braves. Now, I'll also say I've been a big proponent of Zach Wheeler. I still think the Phillies are the best team long term, not right this minute. I still think they're going to win the East. They're only a game out right now. The Mets are currently losing to the Yankees as we record this, but it's only 2-1. If they do, then they're in a flat-footed tie in the loss column. for first place. I still like the Phillies matching up against the Dodgers better than anybody else in a playoff series, mostly because of Zach Wheeler. Zach is my non-Brave favorite pitcher. I think he is definitely worthy of a Cy Young. And this year with everything going on in the National League, Skeens and Wheeler, to me, that's going to be your two probably, right?
What do you think about Jesus Luzardo, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, when the Phillies picked him up, I was a little ticked off as a Braves fan. I wanted them to get Luzardo, right? I thought the Braves needed another starter. Now, it's turned out that's really not the Braves' problem. It's turned out we need some bullpen help. But yeah, I like Luzardo. I think he adds that. If Suarez is on his game, if Nola can be Nola by the time we get to October, he doesn't have to be Nola right now. The Phillies got enough offense and enough pitching. But you get that team into October with that foursome right there. Not to mention if Painter comes along, if you got today, is it Abel? Did I mess up his name? Abel. Thank you. That's a dangerous team. I'm still a big Phillies believer, but I will say this, guys. Don't count out the Braves, okay? Just don't count them out. I'm just telling you, we get Acuna back in a few days. It looks like Strider's coming back in a couple of days. We'll see. We'll see. They still need an Austin Riley to go on like an MVP type run to carry that team. And I don't know if he's capable. Still got the Cubs out there too. Dodgers get swept by the Angels. The Padres get swept by the Mariners. Baseball is crazy. The Diamondbacks and Rockies couldn't stop scoring yesterday, and today the Diamondbacks win 1-0. How can you not be romantic about baseball, right? It's been a great episode. We appreciate everybody listening. We will be back next week, and we have a couple more bonus episodes coming your way very soon with some more special interviews. Very soon, we'll be dropping our interview with Zach Ford, author of Called Up. You guys will be seeing that soon, and we've got some more lined up for you. So stay tuned. We appreciate you, and we will see you at the ballpark.